So what I want to do now, though, just for us, is I want to read you this beautiful, beautiful introduction from a different book that I also highly recommend. And I managed to find the first edition for this. So I actually paid a couple of $100 for this book, but you can obviously get a $10 version. And the original one's got this amazing cover. So this is Thomas Merton. He's kind of, maybe if there's a single-handed person who reintroduced the whole Christian world to meditation in the last century, it was this guy. There's suspicion that he might have been murdered because he died under very strange circumstances. He was found in a bathtub, electrocuted by the ceiling fan, and at like age 56 or something, which is a real pity, because if you read any of his stuff, it's like he was a couple of hundred years ahead of his time. Anyway, so this book is called Seeds of Contemplation, which is really just random devotional thoughts, in actual fact, they're not at all random. They just seem to tie together so beautifully. So I just want to read like 3 paragraphs of this for you, and then we can start, maybe comment a little bit on it. It says, every moment and every event of every man's life on earth plants something in his soul. For just as the wind carries thousands of invisible and visible winged seeds, so the stream of time brings with it germs of spiritual vitality that come to rest imperceptibly in the minds and wills of men. Most of these unnumbered seeds perish and are lost because men are not prepared to receive them. For such seeds as these cannot spring up anywhere except in the good soil of liberty and desire. And then he says this, just listen to this beautiful contrast. He says, if I were looking for God, every event and every moment would sow in my will grains of his life that would spring up one day in a tremendous harvest. For it is God that warms me in the sun, and God's love that sends the cold rain. It is God's love that feeds me the bread I eat, and God feeds me also by hunger and fasting. It is the love of God that sends the winter days when I am cold and sick, and the hot summer days when I labor and my clothes are full of sweat. But it is God who breathes on me with light winds off the river and in the breezes out of the wood. His love spreads the shade of the sycamore over my head and sends the water boy along the edge of the wheat field with a bucket from the spring, while the laborers are resting and the mules stand under the tree. It is God's love that speaks to me in the birds and streams, but also behind the clamor of the city, God speaks to me in his judgments, and all these things are sent to me from his will. If they would take root in my freedom, and if his will would grow from my liberty, I would become the love that he is, and my harvest would be his glory and my joy. And I would grow together with thousands and millions of other freedoms into the gold of one huge field, praising God, loaded with increase, loaded with corn. But if in all of these things I consider only the heat and the cold, the food or the hunger, the sickness or the labor, beauty or pleasure, the success and failure, or the material good or evil my works have won for my own will, I will find only emptiness and not happiness. I shall not be fed, I shall not be full, for my food is the will of him who made me, and who made all these things in order to give himself to me through them. My chief care should not be to find pleasure or success, health or life, or money or rest, or even things like virtue and wisdom. Still less their opposites, pain, failure, sickness, and death. But in all that happens, my one desire and my one joy should be to know, here is the thing God has willed for me. In this, his love is found. And in accepting this, I can give back his love to him and give myself to him and grow up in his will to contemplation, which is life everlasting. It's just the most beautiful. I've read it again and again. So hopefully you guys caught it. You know, the essence of it is he's saying God is constantly trying to sow the seeds of his love into our lives. And he's doing it 1,000,000 times a day, and most of it we miss. But if anything good or bad happens to us, if we could just behind that see the love of God, then those seeds would take root in our hearts, they would satisfy us, and they would cause a great harvest to come from our lives. But if we fail to see behind the things that happen in our lives, good or bad, if we fail to see the love of God, then there's an emptiness, even from the good things like wealth or peace or rest or even wisdom. And so, you know, that's, I guess, really the message is to us, challenge, we'll never get it right for 24 hours a day. But if we could just open our eyes a little bit more and through the good and the bad, just see the love of God, then the seeds of life, of love, the seeds that turn us into being like God, those seeds will take root. And so lads, that's also what the centering prayer does, enables us to be more open to seeing that in everyday life. So hopefully that's encouraging. Any thoughts?
Drew, I don't know if your audio's working or not, so I'm going to go ahead and hear a couple thoughts. You know, it's so amazing how those few paragraphs just kind of put it all into perspective. You know, these kind of summarize it. And the thing that, out of all of those, the thing that sticks out the strongest for me is that feeling of being satisfied. Like, you think, I just turned 50, been seeing a lot of things and experienced a lot of things. And not that I've always been empty, but I've never felt satisfied. Satisfied is a good word for it, than through experiencing the love of God. You know, that to know that, to have that bit of feedback or that understanding of when I let that little seed get planted in me, and I didn't even know it. And later you realize that there is a way that worked in a way that he meant. And you realize that's going on all the time. Like how much harder would I have to work on my own without him to ever experience anything that even comes close to that, right? So even though it's like two worlds battling, I'm still driven. I want to do a lot of things. At the same time, I'm satisfied, and it's just amazing balance. I mean, yeah.
Amen. No, that's great. It's one thing I've been learning is that when something negative happens, like conflict or something, and your heart gets that dark or anxious feeling, I've been learning to release that to the love of God. But there's something just as powerful that you got to do on the other side. When that kind of warm feeling comes because you've just made some money or you got a business deal or, you know, somebody said something good about you, that kind of warm feeling, but it's not fully satisfying. It's just like slightly warm. It's like surface warm. I've tried to not feed on that, you know, and instead just look behind that for the love of God. And that's really been great. It's made me less dependent on some of these false things we chase, you know.
Yeah.
So cool.